Hey guys, Ramsey here. Welcome to another video. Today we have a review, and it's actually the second review from the House of Jinx, which I'm kind of infatuated with. I'm very interested to try more and more from this house. This is Arthur Emrick's house, which if you've been following the channel, you know sometime within the last month or so, I reviewed a fragrance called J Musk, the version 3.0 on the channel. So today we're going to review a fragrance called Hosho. Now, even though this looks like Roxo, and I think whenever I unboxed the fragrance, I think I stupidly went, oh, Roxo, or ROXO or something. But it's actually Hosho. I hope my Portuguese is at least somewhat legible to the Portuguese-speaking population out there. But Hosho basically means purple, or at least like some shade of purple, let's call it, okay? And so what's so interesting about the fragrance to me is this fragrance is everything purple. In fact, I did a This Is Not a Top 10 Purple video. This is one of the fragrances that inspired that video. You can go check out some of my other, purple inspired, or let's say purple smelling fragrances, if you will. And so there's a fascination with the color purple in the fragrance world in general, and actually just in human history, all going back all the way into antiquity. Purple was a very important color, suggesting power and royalty, and we'll talk a little bit about that as well. But you can see it in many places if you're paying attention. Like, for example, Roja Dove is fascinated with the color purple. You can see the purple actually in the cap right there. That purple cap in his higher end bottles. The reason that he wears purple suede, expensive looking kind of suits is that purple goes back as a royal color all the way back to ancient times, basically to antiquity, if you will. And in ancient times, when an emperor would come to power, the masses would say that he would literally don the purple. And there was a very specific reason for this, because they would basically place some sort of cloak around him, or some sort of, wool dyed in purple. Well, probably not wool, probably some sort of amazing fur or something that he killed on the battlefield himself. But one of the reasons why it was one of the most expensive ingredients going back to ancient Rome, it was even more expensive than gold or silver, which is purple dye. Purple dye was the most expensive ingredient. They called it Tyrian purple because of the amount of snails. They were Murex shellfish based in basically, like, they created this dye called Tyrian purple in the Phoenician city of Tyre, and they needed to crush like a crazy amount of these Murex shellfish, okay? A mind-bogglingly insane amount just to get the tiniest amount of purple dye. So the effort compared to what you got was just an unbelievable sort of effort to product ratio. So only the most rich and most powerful men in the empire could wear purple. And that's basically literally where the term royal purple comes from. In fact, it was Gaius Julius Caesar that passed a law that said he was the only one who could wear purple in civilian life. I think another emperor later on ended up putting a man to death for wearing purple in his presence. So you get the idea. This is kind of all about power, to let others know you're the one who has enough money and power to be able to wear purple. So it goes back so far in our minds that it's almost like turned into an archetype of sorts. Purple means something to the people, and that something is power. And even subconsciously, if we don't see it, there are brands and other folks who are sort of taking that representation and showing it to us. Now, obviously, I'm not emperor material, my black and gray, but you get the idea. So look at the cap. I mean, the cap is a perfect representation of the color, as is this picture right here on the front of the bottle. Let me show you a better picture, actually, because it comes with this little card, the note listing here, which I'll read to you in just a second, and the there's the proper image of Hosho. And if you can see kind of the purple sheen, this almost like twilight dusk setting, maybe a little bit of that Lure Blue imagery in there. And so let me read you the little blurb just so you have a little bit of a backstory and tell you how much it sold for, and the quantity in the bottle, and then we'll talk about the smell. So I actually did a spray right before I started the video. I still have not learned my lesson. Everyone keeps saying, you got to spray on camera, Ramsey, and I just sprayed beforehand. But check that sheen out. I mean, that is oily, thick, and you can smell this fragrance for like 16 hours after it's on your skin. Okay, so it's an extremely long fragrance, but like almost every single Jinx fragrance I've smelled so far, it is soft. It swirls around you. Okay, this is not going to be a punch in the face. This is, so the thing about Jinx that you sort of have to understand is that it's almost like the story of like the elephant versus the whale. They're both giants in their own right, but they both sort of play in their own part of the world. The elephant on land, the whale in the water. Out of the water, the whale would probably be useless. In the water, the elephant would be useless, right? And so that's how I think of Jinx inside of this artisanal sort of space that it's in, because so many artisanal houses, they want to represent a specific material to you, and they want to show you a specific material, like a stinky oud or something like that, a rare animalic. And I love that. I absolutely adore that. But the entire artisanal landscape has turned into, you're basically paying for these very high-end materials. And there have been some folks who have said that we're not getting enough like perfumery in the artisanal space. We're just paying for extremely high-end materials and letting the materials do the talking. And I'm fine with that in some case, because sometimes I think just amazing high-end ouds smell better than some of the compositions I've smelled. But Arthur's stance on it is that he's all about the blending. He's about creating accords and spice kits and all this stuff, and letting his overall, trying to look at the entire picture and letting his blending of these amazing materials do the talking, okay? So he does have some formal training. He is a self-taught. He loves reading all these books about, you know, proper blending techniques and all of this stuff. But all of his fragrances that I've smelled, every single one has this air of professionalism about it. It has this air of like smoothness about it. And this is no exception. In fact, this is almost like the perfect archetype of a Jinx fragrance to me. You know, he's all about creating these accords, and the accord that he created here is all around this purple smelling, he calls it a ruby port note. So here's the blurb. Hojo embodies all the spirit of all things purple in perfumery. That is damn true. Vintage orris, jasmines, berry accord, spikenard, blackcurrant, terpene-laden Malaysian ouds, and most importantly, the centerpiece, a ruby Porto accord made in-house. Okay, so here is the note listing. Blackcurrant, magnolia blossom, palo santo wood and fruit, violet, blackberry tincture, and spices. That's the top. Heart of vintage orris, juhi jasmine, which I think is Jasmine auriculatum or something, Bulgarian rose, ruby port accord, a base of Malaysian oud, Cambodian oud, Mysore santal, musk from the Oman treasury. That's the very, you know, vaulted Sultan bin Qaboos treasury. Vintage Siberian musk, white ambergris, blonde and burley tobacco, so different type of tobaccos in the base. Bourbon vanilla, Nepalese spikenard, and sweet castoreum, which we'll talk about once we get to the dry down. Okay, so again, there's your picture. And so one of the reasons why I wanted to kind of highlight some of the backstory of purple, just in humans' minds all throughout history, is because I think it's one of the reasons why he decided to highlight the color in a fragrance. And as I said, the cap is an absolute perfect representation of kind of the fragrance and how it smells, okay? You can almost see the deep, dark twilight purple, royal purple, right? With these milky sort of accents here. And for me, this fragrance is all about this sense of serenity, you know, this feeling of enlightenment, this feeling of coming to a higher plane of understanding. The reason I'm bringing all this up is, if you watched my J. Musk review, you'll know that what I discovered about Arthur of Jinx is that his creations are filled with these accords that he loves to create. He's very, very proud of his blending skills, as I said. So this opens up, when you first spray, this basically opens up like putting one of those furs from the Roman emperors that's dyed in purple right around your shoulders, okay? It is majestic, yet calm. It's very, very serene fragrance. Like, again, just look at the picture. I mean, it represents it beautifully. There is like a serenity there, you know? There's something very peaceful about that. And you know, it's calm and yet serene, and yet it has this extremely realistic, I'm talking one of the most realistic purple fruit openings I've ever smelled. I mean, just in your face realism with the opening. And, you know, I would imagine this serenity, this feeling of like reaching the highest heights is how some of the men who reach the top of their, you know, their ladder, their game must feel. If you get to be a president or if you are, you know, a CEO or something like that, this is how they must feel. Where even if it's like, if I died tomorrow, I'm in the history books, you know? That's kind of the feeling here. And so you start to get this serene calmness. And what ends up happening is, one of the most beautiful, realistic black currant notes I've ever smelled in a perfume comes to the forefront. It is better, than, in my opinion, than Enchanted Forest, which many people love, and I like it as well. But when you compare, what's funny is this is a Bertrand Duchefort creation, and it is beautiful, to be fair. It is. This is everything about black currant as well. If this is everything about purple, this is everything about black currant. You know, this has the leaves, the berries, everything you can think of. But the black currant itself, if you just take that, excuse me, if you can imagine the realism, if you've ever smelled Enchanted Forest by the Vagabond Prince, you know that realism that the black currant kind of has. It is like tenfold in here, and it's just bam in your face, you know? It's like literally going into a black currant bushel, and just, you're just inhaling the sweetness of the berries, okay? It feels a little bit like blackcurrant pie. It feels like blackcurrant jam. It feels like blackcurrant jelly. I mean, whatever you want to imagine, it has this deep, dark, purple blackcurrant feel. And there is this feeling of heft that starts to come in, you know? Like, it's almost like you can't see through that cap, right? And that's kind of what the fragrance starts to embody. Like, almost like biting into a berry that you expect to be bitter, and yet it's sweet, okay? The darker the berry, the sweeter the juice. There's a sweetness to this fragrance, but it's like a bit natural berried sweetness. And when you bite into that berry, I don't want you to imagine a black currant anymore. As the minutes and 15, 20 minutes start to tick by, you're going to notice more and more that there is this beautiful blackberry note that again rivals and maybe even surpasses, just in that note. I'm not saying it's better than this fragrance, but I'm saying just in that note, the realism of this blackberry note is off the charts, you know? And that blackberry note rivals Jubilation 25. Again, another Bertrand Duchefort creation. So now we have two Bertrand Duchefort creations that I'm saying Hojo kind of competes against. The blackberry note in here, sort of rivals what you get, and I would say even surpasses the blackberry note. Now, I love this fragrance. I think I would say I love Jubilation 25 more than Hojo. But that's because that fragrance is very, very near and dear to my heart. But if you just isolate that fruity blackberry note in Hojo, I think it surpasses another Bertrand Duchefort, which is very impressive. So the realism of that purple opening, all around you, you're greeted with deep plum-like purples, you know? Have you ever like bit into a plum and you thought it was going to be overly ripe or something, but it's just the meat of the plum inside is this deep dark purple. That's the feeling when you spray. And it has this thickness, you know, this meaty. The purple just seems to be completely like you cannot see through it, okay? So what ends up happening is pretty soon, once you hit, let's say, 15, 20, 30 minutes in, you're going to notice more and more of this orris note start to come in. And it's he told me that he used orris resinoid, not the iris butter, but the orris resinoid, because it has much more of this purple hue to it. And of course, you all know orris can sometimes have a little bit of a lipsticky quality as well. Here it shows as well. It's a vintage orris. He doesn't, one thing that I wish he would do is, I don't think that he specifies the year, like Russian Adam writes, you know, this particular vintage material was from 1980 to 1985 or something like that. He doesn't do that. He just says vintage orris accord used. But it is beautiful. And the orris resinoid starts to add little red touches to the, like this red lipsticky touches that start to come through. And then if you can imagine this plum and berries and like marzipan type of smell, is still there, but it really starts to turn into this plum wine like feel. Okay, so if you can just imagine this boozy accord. In fact, I think on his website, he sort of put 3 little wine emojis right above right above the note listing, and it's definitely a big part of it, even from the opening. You know, it almost feels like some of the blackberries and the blackcurrant were kind of put into a jar and just allowed to sort of sweeten with some sugar or something, because there's this ruby port wine accord in here that really makes it start to feel very, very boozy. And I really like that about it. It's very, very interesting. But you get this marzipan type sort of smell. And it just slowly starts to blend with the fruits and just melts into the fragrance. You know, it's like slowly unveiling more and more of these purple accords, purple notes, little things you weren't expecting, florals, little lipsticky touches from the orris, and maybe even hints of this like roasted chestnut thing in the background, all this stuff going on, okay? I would say around the 45-minute mark is really where the fruity opening just starts to yield a little bit. I mean, at first it's like fruits and blackcurrant, and I mean these type of violet type accords are really, really just full on, okay? Full afterburners when you first put this on. 45 minutes or so, it starts to yield a little bit, and then you start to get some of the smoke from the Palo Santo wood and maybe a little bit of the oud and stuff like that. Maybe some of the deep, rich, creamy aspects of the fragrance really remain, but there's this milky creaminess that seems to linger throughout the life of the fragrance. But slowly you start to get sort of spices. I mentioned that he likes making spice kits and stuff like that. You do get probably something that he created here in house, and you start to get little bits of smoke that seem a little bit distant, and maybe you start to get the first sort of shift in color. And the thing about this fragrance is there's a lot of shifts in the color spectrum. So obviously Hojo means purple, but if you pay attention to the definition, it means like different shades of purple. And here it almost starts to go red, ruby red almost. The fragrance is still purple all around, but there are these little hues that start to kind of peek through. But I want you to start to think about that lipstick red. Imagine like lipstick red on a beautiful woman, the red touches of that ruby port wine, which really make the fragrance start to turn like different shades of purple, okay? So it's almost like this vibrant purple to this pink hue to almost like, I would say more of the red notes really start to enter. The fruit notes at the top, which were so clearly, I mean, early on when you first spray, it's like so clearly blackcurrant and blackberry. Those two are just so obvious. And now it starts to shift a little bit, and this is where it starts to bring in things that I think are going to be a little bit more subjective depending on where you are in the dry down of the fragrance. So sometimes you will get a little bit more of this like cherry-like note starts to kind of come through. And that cherry note, I think, you think about the cherry biting into like a realistic cherry. You think about sort of, the plum I mentioned earlier, and these are, depending on the level of ripeness, it could be deep red, deep purple, but those are the hues that you really start to smell. And this is where we sort of tie everything back together, go back to our etymology of words we discussed earlier. Slowly to my nose, the hues of purple start to shift more to the hues of pinks and red. I think it's almost like a sliding scale, okay? Where you smell pinks and reds and purples, and you almost get this hint of like l'air bleu, that purple hour when the sun is set, but there's still the light in the air. The heart of the fragrance is filled with florals, like I mentioned, Juhi jasmine, which is a very complex, slightly green take on jasmine with the classic kind of white floral twist. You get Bulgarian rose, and of course you get the violet in the top, which I mentioned. But what is so fascinating to me is it isn't until later, like much later than the 15-20 minutes we are into this spray here, maybe like 3, 4, 5 hours in, where the florals really start to kind of swoop in, and with the musk from the Oman treasury and the vintage Siberian musk, and the Mysore sandalwood and all that stuff, the white ambergris, to kind of form this much softer, much more classical dry down. So it kind of loses a little bit of that purple feel, but it keeps its wavery trembling going back and forth between colors, you know? It just kind of shape shifts into the purple hue is always there, but sometimes when I smell it, it wavers into this sort of red territory, either because there's this cherry note that pops up and disappears, or there's that, you know, red lipsticky accord that kind of slightly comes in, but the orison here feels purple, and it has a little bit more of that purpley feeling as well, is what's so interesting about it. And imagine sitting on these little shades of powdery musks that almost make your eyes feel full when you smell it, you know? The purple feeling stays in the background, but it's like a setting sun. You know, it's like a setting sun. Never truly sets, though. It just carries through almost completely through the dry down. And it's a very, very long fragrance. You know, like I said, 12 plus hours easily. Late into the dry down, the contrast of these powders and like shimmering musks, they add this like light and dark sort of contrast to the purple hue of the day. And it's all that's left after 13 or 14 hours is this powdery, soft muskiness, but you can still smell it for what seems like an entire day. I mean, and that speaks to the high quality ingredients that Arthur is using. The strength of the fragrance, though, is going to be in the first 6 to 7 hours, 6, 7, 8 hours or so. And even though you can maybe smell it between 8 hours and 16 hours, the first 8 hours where you're going to get the hints of the sort of, you know, purple hues kind of coming through with all the different touches. Once you get to 8 plus hours in, that's where it becomes much more of this soft swirl around you. You get these little hints here and there of vanillic, powdery musk grains, and interestingly enough, sweet castoreum, which refers to the sweet, musky scent of castoreum. But they even will sometimes use it as like a flavoring agent because it has this vanilla-like aroma. So it's essentially the sweet part of the castor sac. I don't think it's supposed to smell like regular castoreum. I don't get any regular castoreum smell in this, to be honest with you. But sweet castoreum, someone correct me if I'm wrong, but from my understanding, it has a little bit more of this vanillic-like aroma. And I think that's kind of what you get more into the dry down. If I had if he made this as a bespoke fragrance for the Ram, I would say turn these ouds up, man. Give me some more maybe stinky animalic ouds in the dry down. There is the Malaysian oud, which can have some slightly barnyard elements, but there's a lot of fruits to Malaysian oud usually. And then Cambodian oud, which I think the Cambodian oud may be where some of that cherry wood feeling can come from potentially. But he's blended it all together in a way where it just comes together and hits you like a purple hue, you know, a purple color. That's just the way it feels. And it just sits on this like bed of musks and ouds, but the ouds, they don't come across as, you know, I don't know if I was smelling this, if I would say, oh yeah, Cambodian oud for sure. No, it'd be very, very hard because of the way that he's blended everything, if that makes sense. A little bit of tobacco in the dry down adds slight little touches of smoke, as I mentioned. A little bit of the oud maybe adds tight touches of smoke. Sometimes the Palo Santo wood can give off little touches of smoke. But outside of those three, you're just going to get a lot of the soft, powdery, vanillic notes into the dry down, and lots of the purple notes in the opening. And that's kind of the fragrance. I mean, it's a tough one to break down. There's no reviews on YouTube of it, believe it or not. It is sold out, but this is from his collection 2, he calls it. So he has been known to do different versions, as he did with J Mus. So this may be something where he kind of comes back and does, you know, does something again, something very similar. He has mentioned that sometimes he'll change out like a floral note or an oud note here or there. But yeah, I don't find this too animalic, or just like with J Musk, I didn't find it as animalic as I expected. And when you read the note listing, I mean, you read like musk from the Oman Treasury, vintage Siberian musk, white ambergris, all animalic notes, and then Malaysian oud and Cambodian oud, more notes that could be animalic. but I don't really get much of that at all. It's just kind of comes together as a very natural smelling. You know, like if you took the way that Bertrand Duchefort loves doing these kind of fruity notes and turn them into an artisanal fragrance, I think you would have something very close to something like Hojo. You know, that's my 2 cents on it. But as you can see, I've worn this like 4 times or so as my scent of the day, so I've given this a fair amount of wear. But it's still a very hard fragrance to break down. And it wears with Arthur's usual just soft, silky smoothness, you know? And if you're into that, man, this brand could be like a holy grail brand for you. But again, if you're expecting the hardcore, punch you in the face, ouds, or, you know, musk that's going to just really come at you like in Siberian musk or something like that, this is not, so far this brand has not been that type of brand. Now, Arthur has mentioned that he does have some really animalic and challenging ouds and just animalic fragrances, period, that I should check out. But from the ones I've smelled, it's all about the smoothness and the accords and his blending capability. So that's my take on Hojo. If you have any experience, do let me know. I'd love to hear your thoughts as always. You know, I know these sort of artisanal reviews are very niche type content, especially like the last review I did was the Sherwood Artemis, where it's only like 60 bottles for the whole world. You know, but I like doing this type of content because it's not the stuff that the average YouTuber is putting out there. You know, I'm not reviewing YSL myself or something like that, although I could. I just shit all over it, but I could. But anyways, that's my take. Let me know what you think. As always, it's a pleasure and an honor. Thanks for being here with me. Cheers, guys. Catch you next time. Bye-bye.